Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and I'm back with another edition of Yarn Love. This time I'm working with Red Heart to show off their brand new It's a Wrap Rainbow. I've been working with this yarn all week and I am absolutely in love with it, but it is very unique, so let's take a closer look at it together. Red Heart It's a Wrap Rainbow comes in 8 different colorways. I just happen to possess 3 of them, and these are 3 of my favorites. This one's the Fiesta colorway. This one is, I believe, called, let me double check so I don't get it wrong, yep, Nautical. And this one is Sea Glass, which I've been designing in this week. I love the rainbow colorway in this one, and if you look, you can see that the colors in Fiesta are very distinct. By the time you get to the outside, it's sort of a solid red. On the inside, it's a solid blue, but some of the other ones have a little more variation. At the very inside, this one seems to have a little bit more shading in the blues, and I've been working with this one, so I know for a fact this one keeps the different shades, sort of a mix of colors throughout. So each one of these colorways is a little bit unique. Now let's take a look at the label and then we'll take a closer look at the yarn itself. Now you can see this is a cake style. First of all, that's the biggest thing you might notice, right? This isn't a skein, it isn't a ball, it's a cake. So the wonderful thing is you can find the inside is already sticking out on pretty much every skein of this I've seen. I went to my local Joann's yesterday and it was the same case. You were able to find that center line really easily. So that's great. It makes it a center pull cake, so it sits nicely while you're crocheting or knitting from it. You don't have to rewind it and you don't have it flopping around the room like you might have with a skein that you're pulling from the outside. So each of these balls has 623 yards and 570 meters, and it's a 55% acrylic, 45% cotton blend. So tremendous amount of yardage, and frankly, one of my favorite fiber blends out there. I love the way it just feels nice and cool. It's very smooth. This really is a perfect summer weight yarn. So now let's take a look at the back of the label together. And one thing I really wanted to point out was that the skeins I have and the skeins I saw at my local Joann yesterday all have the superfine or the 1 yarn symbol on them. Red Heart is moving this up to a 2. They just found, I guess, that it works better as a number 2. It works up more nicely as a sport weight yarn rather than a fingering weight yarn. So the newer labels that will be out eventually will have a 2, and you can see how that's going to look right here. Red Heart was nice enough to send me a scan so I could show you how the future label will look, and that will be getting replaced very soon. The rest of it, however, is staying the same. It still calls for a G6 as sort of the base starting hook size and 3.75 millimeter knitting needles. In terms of care, it's machine wash cold, gentle cycle, dry flat. Personally, I will probably end up hand washing my items that I make with this, especially the wearables, but I just think that that tends to lengthen the life of all your handmade garments. So one thing I do want to point out too is that this yarn does have dye lots. So, oh my gosh, this is, told you, we get early labels sometimes as designer. Dye lot 1. When have you seen that before? I don't think I've seen that before either. So be sure to check your dye lots if you are making a project with more than one ball, or cake, I should say, of this yarn. Now let's take a closer look at the yarn itself. I've been working up a little knit swatch. You can see I've been pulling from the center of the Fiesta ball right here. So let me move these out of the way a little bit so you can see just how this yarn moves on the needles. Now I'm going to be pulling apart this ball very soon here. Not for the faint of heart. I know I'm actually going to cut up a ball of this yarn so you can see how it works. But before I cut off this end, I wanted to take a few more stitches in the knitting here that I've been doing. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so since I'm just pulling from the center of the Fiesta colorway, so far I've only gotten the blue, but you can see it's working up really nicely. Now, because it's a cotton acrylic blend and it's essentially threads, which I'll be showing you here closer in a minute, there isn't a whole lot of squish to this fabric, but what it does have is a ton of drape and lightness. Now, on the label, we saw it called for a 3.75 millimeter needle. I'm using a 4, it's just what I happen to grab. This pair, I should say, is by Susan Bates, and I'll take a few stitches here. Let me sort of get my ends all sorted and bring my stitches back to the points here. Now, as I mentioned, this yarn is made up of strings, and again, we'll be taking a closer look at that here in a moment. But this does make it a little bit trickier to knit or crochet with because it can be very easily to split what is essentially each strand. So I'll go ahead and take a few stitches here. You can see it's just really important to get around the entire stitch with your needle, or for that matter, your hook. when you're working with this yarn, because it can be very easy to split. If you do, of course, you can just go back and undo it, and I'll show you on the crocheting. Well, I'll go ahead and show you here on the knitting too. It does frog very well, or tink, or whatever, depending on what you want to call it. It will undo. You can pull out your work very well, and it won't fuzz up or anything like this. This isn't a fuzzy yarn. I haven't, had it in my possession long enough to see if it's going to pill or not, but it doesn't feel like it's going to pill. It definitely feels like it will stay nice and smooth for the life of the garment or whatever you make with it. So you can see those were a few knitting stitches. Now I'm going to go ahead and wreck this swatch. It's not for anything, but if you do need to undo your work, you can see it pulls out very, very easily. Nice and smooth. And the yarn itself doesn't fuzz up at all. So now let's go ahead and take a closer look at this yarn. I'm just going to cut this end off here so we can get that swatch out of our way. And let's look at the yarn itself. Now, this is one strand of it, and it comes up pretty easily like this, and it stays together pretty well. But if you come in close and look at the yarn, let's take a real close-up look at how it comes together and how it's made. Okay, so here you can see one strand that I've pulled apart a little bit. Each strand of It's a Wrap Rainbow is made up of 4 strings like this. And they're very, 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 very lightly wound, basically just enough to hold together while you work with them. For this reason, I don't know that I would recommend this yarn for a very beginner crocheter or knitter. I would say, especially if you're learning, this is not a good yarn necessarily to learn with. Wait until you have some experience. So how do the color changes happen? Now with the Fiesta, as I talked about, the color changes with this particular colorway are a little more dramatic, but this is where I'm going to go ahead and wreck the ball. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out that center section here. Turn away if this is too much, if it's too much to watch happen. I'm going to pull this out here so we can get to where the color changes happen, hopefully, so I can show you how that is made with this yarn. Don't worry, there's plenty more yarn out there. I promise this wasn't the last ball of this colorway. So let's see here. If we can get to the center, let's see. I'm just looking for where we change over to some green. Here we are. Let's see, there we are. This is what I've been wanting to show you. This is how the color changes happen with this yarn. There is a very small knot, and each one of those strands is going to change individually. And that's what creates the very gradual color change throughout the ball. So you can see here, one of these blues has been knotted with a green, and that's okay. This is not the kind of knot that you should freak out about in your yarn, or that you have to cut out and try and weave in the ends or anything like that. Just go ahead and keep crocheting or knitting and ignore that knot. Make it part of the fabric. That is just how this yarn works, and you don't want to try and be weaving in all these little ends by themselves. It'll mess up how the yarn lays, because one of these strings will end up being shorter essentially than the rest. You just need to keep working right past it. And I can show you in the crochet project I've been working on that really does work out quite well. Okay, so I've been working on my first pattern in It's a Wrap Rainbow, and it's going to be a swimsuit cover-up. You can see it in progress right here. I am almost done, and I've been racing to get it done for summer. I'm using the Sea Glass colorway, which you can see right here, which has some beautiful variation throughout. And this was definitely the favorite picked by all of you on YouTube and Facebook when I asked what you wanted to see it in. And you can see how beautifully, this was actually the end of the skein. I was working this direction at this point in the fabric, but you can see how beautifully and gradually that color changes just right on throughout. So I wanted to show you though, closer up here, and I put a stitch marker there so I could remember to show you on this video. This is where one of the color changes happened in this fabric, and I'll pull out the other fabric here so you can see it a little bit more easily. But I hope you can spot it right there. You pull it against the white. Ah, there it is. There's one tiny little knot. Sticks out ever so slightly. And you could try and tack that down somehow if you wanted to, but really it's very, very short and it's fine. You're not going to spot that in the finished fabric at all. You can see it really just fades in. And there are ends all over here, little tied in ends together. Every time there's a color change, there's going to be another string that changes color. And you really don't spot those knots at all. So don't be afraid of that. Now, I showed you how it works up in knitting. And you can see how it's working up in crocheting here, but let me take a few stitches too with it. Let me find where I left off. I've got stitch markers all over this project to help me keep my place. Let's see. So this was my last stitch. Oh, got it turned around. There we go. And I tried a lot of different hook styles with this yarn, and they all worked really well. I think that because of the actual stitch pattern I'm using, I just really liked the way this one worked up with my clover hook. I'm using a K 6.5 millimeter. Of course, it calls for a different hook size on the label, but I really always just think those are a good starting point, not so much where you need to end up. It's not a hard and fast rule. So I'm just going to take a few more stitches here. I've got some chains and double crochets in this pattern. You can see at this point in the colorway, the string, there we go. The string itself is made up of 4 of sort of these, gosh, I don't know what to call it, sort of these teal colored strands, and you've got like a darker teal. I guess we'll go with that. A lighter teal for 3 of the strands and a darker teal for the 4th strand. And then I know that the next change, one of these lighter ones will become another darker one, and then another darker one, and then eventually we'll switch over to what's the next color in the section. So it's just really fun to crochet with this yarn and see how the different color changes just happen throughout your fabric. Now, in terms of quality and consistency, I have found no knots that were not supposed to be there. Basically, the only knots I've seen in this were the ones that were intended for the color changes. It is perfectly consistent throughout. I haven't found any thinness, any thickness. I think it's just simply a matter of the construction. You just can't get that with this kind of yarn because it is made of those 4 strings. It's going to be really consistent across all the different colorways, the different lot sizes. I haven't found any sort of variation between the different colors or anything like that you'd have to worry about. In terms of projects it's not good for, I think you could probably make just about anything with this, but I think it's going to be most popular for garments simply because it is a thinner yarn, and making a blanket with a yarn in a number 2 weight would take so much longer. And of course, it's got a tremendous amount of drape. So it's not going to be, unless you want to work with a really, really tiny hook, you're not going to get a lot of stiffness for something like a basket. So I think this is going to be most popular for garments, but it's also going to be fun to see what people do come up with this yarn. It is just so much fun and so pretty to use. So I hope you'll give it a try. As I mentioned, I have found it at my local Joann. I saw it at a Joann in Colorado, and I have also, of course, seen lots of it on redheart.com. So if you follow the link in the description, I've got a link to the yarn as well as to the links that the tools that you saw me use here today, including these really fun stitch markers from Clover. So you can check all that out at the link in the description. And I hope you, like I said, I hope you'll give it a try. It's a really fun yarn. And if you're watching this in the month of June 2018, I've also got a giveaway going for it on mooglyblog.com. So be sure to enter that as well. I wish you all the best of luck, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give us a like and let us know what you thought in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Moogly YouTube channel and hit that little bell next to the subscribe button so you'll be notified anytime we've got a brand new video. Thanks so much for watching.